Hi everyone, my name is Teresa Lynn, and I'm here today to share with you more about having a degree in social work, what the social work field might look like, and also what you may do with a social work degree. Before I get started, I did want to share more about who I am and kind of where I come from. So I'm originally from Wisconsin. I grew up in the suburbs of Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a larger city in the southeast corner of Wisconsin and about an hour and a half north of Chicago area. My parents are originally from Taiwan, which is a small island country off the east coast of China. They came here in the 70s. My dad got his master's degree in manufacturing engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And my mom had started her master's degree, but actually didn't finish because they started a family instead. But she does have a bachelor's degree from Taiwan in business administration with a focus in accounting. I also have a brother who is 4 years older than me. And yeah, so I spent most of actually all of my childhood in Wisconsin, which I think was a fine place to grow up. I definitely got to experience more things that the West Coast doesn't have, which also brings me to the point that I actually do not live in Wisconsin anymore. I now live in the greater Seattle area in Washington State. So that's where I grew up. To share more about, I guess, what my family had really valued growing up is education was a really big thing. So I know that that might be kind of an Asian stereotype, is that, I have to get straight A's and I have to be good at math and all those kinds of things. My family kind of followed some of those, but not all of them. They definitely did think that A's were needed, that a B in a class was not very good, and if I got a C, that was considered very bad, and if I got a D, which is what I got in calculus, that was absolutely terrible. So that's a little bit of how I grew up. It was always expected for me and my brother to go on to college. That was almost never a question. We definitely had to start preparing for college. Starting in my sophomore year of high school, my dad bought books of different colleges around the country and different majors you could choose from, and just all these like big books to really research and find out more about where will we go for college. So through that, I had to really start thinking about my career path and what I wanted to do pretty early on as a sophomore in high school, which I know is not always common for everyone. And I saw some benefits in doing that because I was a little bit more set, but I will say that I don't think it's necessary. Now that I'm older and I'm looking back on it, I actually have kind of changed my course and pathway. So what I thought I was going to do as a sophomore in high school, I did get the degree for it and I did pursue it later on in a master's degree. But what I'm now doing in my career actually is not related to that at all. So that's just a little thing to keep in mind and to think about, since I know you all are in high school and are probably also thinking about what you want to do with your career, and you might be getting some pressure on like, hey, you have to know exactly what you're going to study and exactly what you're going to major in and exactly which school you're going to go to. That can be helpful, but I actually don't think it's necessary, and it can actually be more stressful than it is necessary. So education was really important. And so with that said, I actually have 3/4 degrees. So I say /4 because one of them is a minor, not a major. So I was born and raised in Wisconsin, but I actually went to college at University of Washington in Seattle. And there I majored in psychology and I got a minor in diversity. After that, I actually went straight into a master's degree in social work. It was a Master of Social Work degree with a concentration in mental health. And that actually I went back to Wisconsin for. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is not the same city or town that I grew up in. It's about an hour and a half west of where I grew up. So it was still a new city, but I was closer to my mom at the time, so that was nice to be back home, to be near her, because actually when I was in Seattle, I have no family and no relatives or anybody in Seattle, so I kind of was on my own. Fast forward to today, so I actually just finished my third higher education degree in social work. I got a doctorate in social work from the University of Southern California just this past December 2020. That was an all online program, so that's actually pretty different from my bachelor's degree and my master's degree were both all in person, but I actually stayed in Seattle area while I completed my doctorate program, and it was different because I was working full-time as well. My other two degrees, I was in school full-time and working part-time jobs, whereas this time around for my doctorate degree, I was working full-time and going to school almost like 3/4 time. I had 2 classes per semester. And that degree was also an accelerated program. Usually a doctorate degree, if you get a PhD, which is more of a research-based degree, you may easily be spending 4 to 7 years completing that on top of college. But with the doctorate degree, it was more advanced practice related, and therefore they crammed everything into 24 months. So I did 6 semesters of school in a row. And instead of doing my own research dissertation, which is the common word for a PhD, I created a capstone project. And so it was meant to be a lot more hands-on and something that I would implement after I graduate. So I guess technically because I just got a doctorate in December, it's still very new to me, but I'm technically Dr. Lynn. So some people may call me Dr. Lynn. I am okay with being called Teresa, but it is nice just to be acknowledged that I had achieved that higher degree. And actually, I did not know this until after I graduated, that I'm actually the first person in my entire family, so not just my immediate family, but all of my relatives as well, to get a doctorate degree. So that's just a little bit about me. That's where I came from. So I know that Joel had also asked me to share something about that special event or something that might have helped define my life or change things. And I would say college. College really changed my view of the world and kind of how I feel about things, as well as how I identify as a person, and just it opened up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities and really changed perspective. And also the reason I didn't stay in Wisconsin was actually I did not get into the school in Wisconsin. So University of Wisconsin-Madison is kind of the #1 state school in Wisconsin. And I actually got waitlisted. I did not get into that school. So that's kind of just a little bit about me. I know that there's a lot of questions that you all have asked, so I want to make sure that I have time for that. So I'm going to stop here about myself and transition into answering your questions. What do you recommend for specific classes at a high school to kind of help prepare you? And so for me, I knew that I was interested in psychology, and this kind of helps answer someone else's question about how I chose my career and what inspired me to pursue social work. So in high school, as you all know, I had said that my dad kind of wanted me to start thinking about what I was going to major in. So long story short, I had some friends where I became very close with them, and they had a lot of stuff going on at home. It wasn't necessarily a lot of big things, like nobody was going through abuse or going through, harmful things, but it was just a lot of stressful things. So there might have been a lot of relationship issues or relationship concerns, just a lot of things that I think a lot of people in high school go through, we know as teenagers, or when we're teenagers at the time, how we're feeling, but our parents seem to never understand us. And we just need to deal with like having our parents understand how we're feeling while supporting us, and just all sorts of dynamics. And because of that, I found myself being the kind of friend where I would listen to people and listen to the problems they're going through, offer some support, offer guidance, offer advice, help them talk through it, really just be a support person. And so as I thought about it some more, I realized that I really liked being that kind of friend. And I think I was pretty decent at it. Like my friends really liked going to me for any of their issues to talk about, because I was really good at listening, and I really liked listening. And I would also be able to just think about things differently with them. And so then I started thinking maybe I want to be a counselor. And so, and this is when I was thinking about like mental health counseling and therapy, and maybe one day I want to open up private practice and be a person who does therapy one-on-one. Because I knew about psychology, I did take psychology in high school, and that was helpful just to introduce it. I still did really like it. I liked learning about the human mind and the brain and different kinds of mental illnesses and disorders and that type of thing. I actually don't know what kinds of classes are all offered to you all now in high school, since it's been quite a while since I was in high school and I was in a different state. But I would say that if you have room for electives or anything that looks interesting to you, to take it, like to put that in there, because part of figuring out what you want to do in your future education and career is to get an idea of what you like, and sometimes you don't know what you like until you've taken a class. One of the questions is, did I have experiences with social workers growing up? I actually didn't. So this leads into also answering another question that someone had asked, is why social work? So you may be wondering, how did you get into social work if you were doing psychology? So what happened is, when I was getting ready to finish up my bachelor's degree in psychology in college, so this would have been about my junior or senior year, I went to a psychology advisor, or an academic advisor in the psychology department. And just to talk about, am I on track? Am I taking all the classes I needed to take in order to graduate? That kind of thing. And also because I knew that in order to be a therapist, I would have to get a master's degree. Like I that was research I did on my own in high school and during college to know that that's what I had to do. So I went to the academic advisor to kind of give me some advice and guidance on it. And they asked me very simply, just, why do you want to get a PhD, is what I was asking about at the time. And I said, oh, because I want to be able to open up private practice and be a mental therapist. And I believe the only way to get there is to get become a psychologist and get a PhD degree, because that's what I found on the internet. And the advisor actually said, oh, if that's why you want it, you actually don't have to do that. You could get a master's degree in social work. And I had said, oh, really? I didn't know that, because I thought social work, my understanding of social work was really child protective services. So I was thinking about child welfare systems, and that was not something that I was interested in. I was interested in the mental health counseling. And the advisor told me, no, actually social work is a very broad field. There's actually many different concentrations and different pathways you can go within the social work field. Child welfare and child protective services is a big part of social work, but that's only one part. There's actually a whole mental health track that you could go. And with that master's degree, you can open private practice after you get licensed. And the master's degree, if you already have a bachelor's degree in social work, which I didn't, but if you already had one, so it would be called a BSW, you could finish your master's degree in 1 year, full time. Because I didn't have a bachelor's degree in social work, it would take me 2 years full time. So that one conversation, I think it only lasted about 20 minutes, and that one question of why I was pursuing why I thought I had to pursue a PhD changed everything. I looked into social work, and the more I looked into it, the more I realized it actually aligned with what I was more passionate about to begin with. So as I had mentioned before, I have a minor in diversity. So I took classes like sociology of social problems, women's studies, sociology of deviance, where I learned about, is it deviant to be a prostitute? And I took English classes in cultural studies, where I read books that were written by a diverse group of people. And it really opened my eyes to wow, there's so much more to our society. There's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of oppression. There's a lot of systemic issues and racism and all sorts of things, and sexism and gender oppression. And I didn't get to take all the kinds of classes I wanted to take in college, actually. I did not get to take anthropology, which I thought would have been really cool. I did not get to take any ethnic studies. I did get to take an Asian American in psychology class, which is how I learned more about being Asian American and the model minority stereotype and how it's a myth. That's a whole nother conversation in its own. But yeah, so I was interested in diversity and all of those kinds of things. And that's actually more of what social work is about. Social work is more about helping those who have been marginalized by society, those who have been oppressed in society. And it's all about social justice and really looking at people holistically. So psychology was more about just a person's mind. Social work is more about people and other factors in their life, like their family situation, their work situation, their income situation, anything else that is happening in their life and how that's impacting their mental health and impacting them as a person. So not just what's going on in your brain and the science behind that. So that really changed things, and that really encouraged me to pursue that. And that's why I applied to get a Master of Social Work degree with a mental health concentration. What advice I'd give if you wanted to go into social work, specifically the kind that works with kids. So I'm going to assume that this question is asking about child protective services and child welfare. So I personally actually never got to work in child welfare, but I do have friends and colleagues who have. So I'll share with you what I have heard from them. So this isn't firsthand experience, but it is something that I've heard as a common trend. Working in child protective services and child welfare is very much needed. That field needs social workers. There's a lot of room for improvement in the systems. There's a lot of needs there. People that are caught in the system very much need a supporter and an advocate, which is what social workers really are, and a person who can find resources for them and be there for them and all sorts of things. Now, with that said, I'm going to go back to systems. So because systems were built not to support people, there's a lot of rules and regulations and restrictions that social workers might run into that make it harder to work in that field. So meaning, maybe me as a social worker, I really want to advocate for my client. I really want to help them, and I want to go above and beyond, and I would want to do all these things. But because of funding restrictions, or because my organization that I'm working for is grant funded, maybe I have to follow a rule that tells me, no, I can't, that I can't do that, or we just don't have money for me to do that, or things like that. So I'm constantly running up into barriers and constantly running up into system barriers and just like so many needs and not enough resources. And that is what makes it really challenging and leads to burnout. So burnout is very common among the social work field when people just stay in more of the frontline positions and are kind of this constant advocate and pusher of social change and coming up to barriers and things like that. So therefore, I have heard that the average amount of time that a social worker stays in that job might only be about 3 to 5 years before they want to switch and go into a different social work job in a different place, or actually just completely switch careers. So I'm not saying this to tell you not to pursue it if this is what you're interested in, because I think it's very much needed. We definitely need more child welfare workers, and we definitely need social workers to help change the system and to help keep pushing for social change and being social justice advocates. But just to be prepared that it can be really challenging and that you might be wanting to change up your job every few years because it's hard. And so that also leads to one of the questions was, how does this affect your mental health if you become a social worker? And also, is it hard to help some people? And do you ever feel like it's not worth it? So it can affect your mental health. I think that, and it can be hard to be in this job because so much of it is supporting people most in need. So you're trying to find all of these resources for people that aren't always there, and you're always fighting for someone, and it's just the nature of the job can be challenging. That's why in social work, and this was taught and ingrained in me throughout my master's degree, was we have to practice self-care. And this, I think, has become more common now than it was back when I was in my graduate school, which was at least, I want to say, like 10 years ago now. So self-care is more than just, oh, I want to go for a spa day, or I need to go get ice cream or something like that. It's really an intentional practice that really helps you cope with a lot of the hard things that this job might bring up. And also, it's not only about the resources. So going to the mental health part. So I was a counselor and a therapist for a while, right? Is that you might hear some really hard stories. like your clients and your patients that you're working with might have gone through a lot of stuff in their lives. For me, I was lucky that I'm able to kind of just compartmentalize things, and I'm able to really just meet people where they're at and listen to them and kind of keep those stories in the time I'm with them, and then to not really bring it home with me. But it's really challenging to do that. And it's even more challenging if you yourself have gone through a lot of these same challenges. It could be easy for those stories that you hear from your patients and clients to also trigger the things that are happening with you that you might have gone through in your past. So because of that, self-care also means you have to also be really strong in your own self-awareness, in your own mental health, in your own coping habits. And so you want to make sure that you have healthy coping habits. By healthy, I mean healthy amount of exercise, eating healthy food, getting a healthy amount of sleep, having a really great emotional support system. So great family, great friends, and just having hobbies and things to do that are healthier, like if you like to draw, or if you like to go for walks, if you like to sing, if you like to read books, if those types of things. That's really good self-care and something you can practice on a regular basis. Oh, and like meditation and mindfulness and that type of thing. And if you've got a lot of stuff that's gone on in your past, don't be afraid to also pursue a therapist of your own. Like even if you are a mental health social worker, a lot of mental health social workers have their own therapists, because it's a lot to have to hold on to everybody else's stories, that you also need that for yourself. And so that's kind of what really helps to kind of deal with all of this and let it not get to your mental health, so that you can continue to be a social worker and continue to help other people. Because I think it's really helpful, if you do have your own personal experiences, to be able to use that in your work with other people, because you can relate more. But you have to be really solid in how you take care of yourself. Sometimes you might also run into clients and patients where their personalities or their attitudes or the way they are don't work well with you. Like maybe it just doesn't work well. The thing about being a professional in social work is you have to try really hard to not have your own biases, and to recognize what your biases are, and to not bring that into the relationship with your client and patient. And that's where it can get challenging, but it's doable, right? Like as long as you're very aware and you're thinking about, I need to meet the person where they're at, and the problem is like they are having a problem that I need to help them solve. It's not about me. And even if like they might be a person, let's say they're a person with opposite political ideas, opposite religion ideas, maybe they're racist, maybe they're sexist, maybe they're, all these things. That doesn't mean I shouldn't help them. And that doesn't mean that I should help them differently, right? I have to work really hard to still be there for them. And so the question was, do I ever feel like sometimes it's not worth it? And I actually will say that has never crossed my mind on whether it's not worth it. I think there's times where I might think, wow, this is so hard. Can I keep going? But in the end, if social workers weren't there in CPS, let's say, if social workers weren't there in hospitals, if social workers weren't there as mental health, like that person might not, that client of yours, that client or patient of yours might not have anyone to go to. So that's where I keep that in mind. And I think it's very much worth it, because even if it's hard, I'm at least trying my best to help them and help other people reach their fullest potential, because that, in my mind, is the point of life, right? Is to be very humane and to help other people and to help other people achieve more and to succeed more and things like that. Another question that somebody asked is, what did I learn in grad school? Like what did I have in grad school that helped prepare me for my jobs? So in a master's of social work degree, you do get a practicum. So because I had to do 2 years, I got 2 practicums. So practicum is kind of like an internship. But what makes it different is that it's tied to an actual academic course. So I was enrolled in a course that was pro practicum. I had a seminar class that I had to go to once a week, and I actually had to follow a certain set of learning objectives and, like make a plan for what it would be like at my placement, and making sure that what I'm learning in my grad program, I am implementing in my work. And then the practicum placement is where I actually get to work in real life at a site part-time. So I was working about 12 to 14 hours a week in my practicum site. And actually, because it's a practicum, most of the time you don't get paid. So that's why it's kind of like a volunteer internship, but you definitely get to learn on the job. And so that's what was really helpful in me in my master's degree. However, I want to say, nobody ever feels 100% prepared just after graduation to go into the workforce. I think the nature of everything, and this isn't just in social work, I think it's in every job, is that you learn a lot more on the job, and that it's after you get your degree and start working, you're going to make mistakes, which is completely fine and actually is expected, because that's how you learn. You're going to fail at some things, which again is how you learn. So it's totally fine. So a lot of it is, the point of school is more to give you a foundation and to help you learn how to be critical thinkers, and help you learn how to problem solve, and help give you some tools on how to deal with things. But really, ultimately, that's only a foundation, and you really grow and learn a lot more when you actually start working. So I'm actually going to stop here for a second. I know that this is really long. That was more about social work and working in it. I'm now going to transition into my actual jobs that I have held with my degree and what my job is now. After my master's degree, I got a couple of part-time jobs with the degree. So I was working in a county jail as a mental health professional, and I was working in a geriatric psych hospital as a social worker / discharge planner. Going back to the job at the county jail. So this was a part-time job. I was working swing shift, which was from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. and mostly on weekends, because I was balancing that with my other part-time job at the geriatric psych hospital, which was during the day, and working with people who were 55 and older. But anyway, for the jail job, mental health professionals were a common thing, at least in the Wisconsin jail that I was at. And they mostly were there to support inmates who already had mental illness diagnoses. So when they come into the jail, and so this was not prison, I was in the jail, which is different. It's a shorter temporary stay versus prison, and it's before people have gotten sentenced. And so they're mostly just waiting to hear from whether they are going to get charged, and waiting for trial and things like that is what jail is. So mental health professional. So I would have to, when I was in that position, I would make my rounds. I would be given a list of like 20 to 25 people per shift to go see, which is a lot of people. So that would mean I only really had like 10 to 15 minutes, and sometimes less, to meet with each person, because I had to walk all over the jail. So I was in minimum security, medium security, maximum security. I always had security guards around. So if anyone is curious about the safety, I actually never felt unsafe. That there's all these parameters to get into a place. You need to use your badge to get into an elevator. Anyway, So it would be a lot of like checking in, seeing how people were doing. Did they need anything? I was actually handing out like coloring pages and coping worksheets. I was checking to see if someone was suicidal, if they were going through a mental health issue, if they needed to see the psychiatrist, if there were any needs, if, let's say, they were feeling down or they were depressed. A few stories I can quickly share is just like, there was one person who just found out that his best friend or somebody close to him had just passed away, but he's in jail and he's not able to go see him. So I had to talk through that with them. There were all sorts of things. I would say, to summarize what that experience was like, to talk about systems, it was very challenging for me in the end to witness what it was like in the justice system for these inmates. But there was a lot of injustice, and I wish the system was different, because there were people in jail who really shouldn't have been in jail. There was a lot of people who were in jail and never heard from their probation officer or parole officer. Like, they had no idea what was going to happen to them. There were people who were put in jail for not paying a speeding ticket, and because they never paid their speeding ticket in the state of Wisconsin, they had to be by default be put in jail for 30 days, and they only get one phone call, right? But these days, we don't always memorize people's phone calls, and you're not allowed to have your cell phone. So it was like they couldn't call anybody. So there were people who were losing their jobs. They were not able to pay rent. They were not able to contact their family. Like, there's just so much that needed help. So it was a very interesting job, but it was hard. Oh, and also another thing about the jail job. So not only did I make rounds meeting with people, I also did booking. So everybody, when they're booked into jail, they have to go through a psychosocial assessment. Basically, it was me asking a bunch of questions about their mental health. So that's how we found out if somebody was taking medications, if somebody has a mental illness, if somebody was suicidal, if somebody needed any more needs. Then we would also determine, like, hey, we need to put them on our list to be seen later, and like all sorts of things. So yeah, I could go on and on about the jail, but in that role, I was not called a social worker, and I did not have to be a social worker to get that job. It could have been someone with a mental health counseling background, but either way, it was called a mental health professional, and it was mostly geared towards supporting people who already had mental illnesses and mental health needs coming into jail. For the community college system, so I did that for about a year, and then in the community college system, which I was in for about 6 years, I had several different roles in that time. But the first role that I had was as a veteran support specialist / counselor. So that was where it was much different than the jail, and much different from traditional and clinical social work. It was a lot more of academic advising, a lot more of program support, helping student veterans transition into college, and making sure that they can navigate the community college systems, and just like overall being a support. That was the veteran support specialist part. I also was a counselor, so I also was doing one-on-one counseling. So this would be career counseling, personal counseling, if anyone is going through depression or anxiety or stress or grieving, relationship issues, that type of thing. So I did that for a couple years or so, and I also was part-time counseling in a more traditional sense for other students, not just veterans. And then I transitioned into program management. And this happened because I realized in my veteran support specialist position that there weren't actually that many students to see in a counseling way, but there was a lot of room for improvement for the Veterans Resource Center, which is where I was working out of, where students in general, they might not need to see a mental health counselor, but they definitely need support. They definitely needed someone to help them navigate and to talk about school, if there were any stressors, if there were any issues with their faculty, if there was any issues of financial aid. That was actually one of the biggest things. And they just needed someone to be able to talk to and to kind of advocate for them, to find resources for them, and to be there for them. And that's really where I brought in my social work perspective and my social work skills into that role, even though my job title was not social work. So there actually aren't social workers necessarily in the community college setting. I know that was one of the questions. However, there might be student support people who have social work degrees, if that makes sense. So you won't necessarily be able to go to community college if you enroll in community college and be like, hey, I want to find a social worker. It might be more of like, hey, I want to find my academic advisor, or like, I want to join the student organization or the student club and I need a student support specialist, or I just need someone to help me out. And they may end up having a social work degree. Not always, though. A lot of times people in those roles actually have master's degrees in education, in higher education. But that's kind of where I was able to get in. So you'll see now that I'm actually starting, at that point, I was starting to move away from traditional social work, and I was still using my social work degree, but I wasn't in clinical social work anymore, and I wasn't going into like child welfare or hospitals or anything like that either. So I did program management. Then that led me to my most recent job at a community college, which was the program manager of a Bachelor of Applied Science degree in Child, Youth, and Family Studies, which was embedded at the community college. So this is kind of unique to Washington State. There's a few other states around the country that also have these, but not every state has them. I believe California has started some of these. But yeah, so for the college that I was working for, this was actually the first Bachelor of Applied Science degree for that community college. And because it was in Child, Youth, and Family Studies, actually a lot of the students that were coming in had associate degrees in human services or associate degrees in addiction studies, and they were addiction counselors, or in family support studies, or in early child education. So that's like a whole different career and education path that I did not have the option of, that you all actually may have the option for, is that associate degrees that are in human services, and that will feel very much like social work, and you don't actually have to go on to a university necessarily to do it. However, it is a different pathway, and you might run into a few hurdles in your career path depending on what you're looking for. So for example, if you want to be a social worker with the social work title and to go on to and all that kind of thing, you might have to do the social work degree. But if you more just want to do the work of a social worker and don't really care about whether you're called a social worker, you want to work in social services or human services, you might be able to start by going to a community college and getting a 2-year associate's degree in that and get an entry-level position before transitioning on to get more education if you want to go on to get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. So anyway, that's just something that you all might be able to look into a little bit more. It's different per state and different per city and location, though. Yeah, so as the program manager for this Bachelor of Applied Science degree, I ended up doing a lot more of, I worked with instructors, so like faculty. I supported students in their programming, so a lot of like academic advising support, dealing with financial aid, dealing with any other stressors. So if a student would come to me and say like, hey, I'm about to lose my job and I can't pay rent, like, do you have any suggestions on what I can do? Do you have any resources? Or like, hey, I'm about to miss or lose financial aid and I can't pay for school. Do you have any suggestions on how I can get scholarship money or things like that? So basically, it wasn't traditional social work, but you might be able to tell already that the job in itself really benefits from me having a social work background, because it's still more about being resourceful. It's still more about advocating for people and to support people and to talk things through. It just might be a different title, it might look differently, but by me having a social work background, I think I was supporting the students a lot more and a lot more holistically than other people may have if they didn't have a social work degree. So the reason I'm bringing that up is to showcase that the social work degree is so broad, and also it's so relevant in a lot of different industries that you can take it into a lot of different areas. For example, most recently, in January of this year, I got recruited to work for Microsoft. So again, I'm not called a social worker, and my position is a program manager, a business program manager in a Microsoft Leap apprenticeship program. So this is basically an apprenticeship program that opens up opportunities for people and that traditionally would not be able to get into the tech industry because maybe they don't have quote unquote the right college degree, maybe they don't have the work experience, whatever it is. And so Microsoft Leap apprenticeship program is all about recruiting unconventional talent into Microsoft and into the tech industry. And so if this sounds kind of aligned with social work, it to me, it kind of is, right? Because it's all about opening up doors. It's all about helping people who historically and traditionally didn't have opportunities to now have opportunities. So again, I'm using my social work background as well as my counseling background, everything like that, and bringing it into my job today. And I'm supporting apprentices throughout their process. So they spend 16 weeks at Microsoft. There could be a lot of different things going on. There could be issues with their equipment. We're currently all working from home because of COVID. And I know that was one of the questions is, does COVID impact my job? And yes, I actually have been working from home for a whole year now. I haven't been in an office. Everything has been at at home. And so, yeah, so I guess the long story short is that even though I'm not in a traditional social work uh, job, I can use my social work background. And also, so my doctorate degree actually was in social innovation and social change. It is social work, but the focus was social innovation and social change. So I'm using those skills that I developed in being innovative and with something called design thinking and just being able to create new things and to really push for social change that I'm also bringing into my work today. And so overall, yes, I like my job. I think I really like being a person with a social work background because I think it's so broad and open, and I like the foundations of what social work is about. I like advocating for people. I like pushing for change. I like problem solving. I like supporting people. I like being resourceful. I like being strategic and being able to help others grow, whether it's an actual person or an organization. And I think that that's all possible because of my social work degree. Of course, there's a lot of people with the exact same job title that don't have a social work degree and are able to succeed and do things, but it's just going to look different. Like the way my coworkers support their apprentices might just look different than how I support them because I have a social work degree and they may not. So yeah, I hope that I was able to answer most all of your questions. I know that I talked a lot and this is a lot of time, but thank you so much for listening and for asking all of your great questions. I hope I answered them okay. If you want to learn more about anything, feel free to let your teacher know. And I am happy to do more videos, or I'm happy to connect with people directly and to answer specific questions and to connect. So yeah, I hope you all are doing great. I'm excited for what the future may bring for all of you, and I hope school's going well. And I guess I'll end it here. Take care. Bye.